It's official and it's a shocker. Donald J. Trump will be the next president of the United States. We'll look at the hows and whys and what it all means in San Diego and the rest of progressive California. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, politics editor at the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, good to be here.
Good to see you today. Carl Luna, professor of political science at Mesa College. Hi, Carl.
Good to be here, Mark.
Glad you could join us. Investigative reporter Amitha Sharma of KPBS News. Hi, Amitha.
Hi, Mark.
We're glad you're here today. And reporter Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS. Hi, Allison.
Pleased to be here, Mark.
Well, words like stunned and shocked don't seem to do the job. A man who ran a campaign which featured many falsehoods, personal attacks on a variety of people, and revelations of inappropriate behavior toward women was elected president of the United States this week. Donald J. Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton but won the Electoral College. We're going to start with back-to-back clips from each just after the election. Here's Hillary Clinton.
Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. And we don't just respect that, we cherish it. It also enshrines other things: the rule of law, the principle that we are all equal in rights and dignity, freedom of worship and expression. We respect and cherish these values too, and we must defend them.
Hillary has worked very long and very hard over a long period of time, and we owe her a major debt of gratitude for her service to our country. I mean that very sincerely. Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division, have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. I've spent my entire life in business looking at the untapped potential in projects and in people all over the world. That is now what I want to do for our country. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
All right, Michael, that campaign, which many described as ugly, the voting turnout was depressed all the way across the board here. Well, what happened? It's a very complex thing. Can you boil this into a nutshell, or are we going to be studying this for a long time to come?
Probably studying for a long time, Mark. As with almost any election, there's no one thing you can point to. There's many things, and particularly when it's this close. But I think one of the more remarkable things is that here was the potential for the first woman to win the presidency, and a majority of women voted for the guy, her opponent. That was one of the more stunning things that exit polls showed me. And another thing was that he got 30% of the Latino vote. I mean, the things he said about women in his past and during the campaign about Latinos or immigrants anyway, it's really remarkable. So it does make the whole notion of the sexism and racism aspect a little more complex of this campaign. But the last thing that Donald Trump said there, he talked about the forgotten men and women, and I think from the beginning, that's where he really capitalized on. You know, a lot of the term is now, you know, the white working class. A lot of people just feel that they've been left behind, that there were a lot of promises made almost a generation ago, a little less, by NAFTA and all these trade agreements that was going to lift everybody up. That didn't happen, at least for them, and that's where I think you're seeing a lot of this anger. So, you know, a multiple of those things. And, you know, just one sort of footnote, this is a little bit removed, but remember Jesse Ventura, the wrestler who became the governor of Michigan, surprised everybody, but he and Donald Trump understood something about America, or at least his state, and Donald Trump about America, that a lot of us didn't quite see.
Carl?
Jesse Ventura didn't do well. That became the problem. I think he was a one-term governor.
Right. But getting elected,
he got elected. Yeah. But then can you translate that skill set into governance is the big question right now, as with the concession speech of Hillary Clinton and President Obama's meeting with Mr. Trump. The idea is we move forward and give them their best shot, but there's going to be a really bumpy road to go to follow with this. He still lost 70% of the Latino vote. He lost 90% of the African-American vote, overwhelmingly with Asian Americans. lost largely with people with a college degree, one whites, but when you add in everybody, he lost the educated population. There was a 25-point gap, gender gap between men and women in this election. And still half of America didn't even turn out to vote.
So there's the
Amita?
enthusiasm gap, which you and I have discussed for years now. We've talked about the Democratic Party morphing into the Republican Party. You've said they represent the same wings of two wings of one
the same party. A lot of people make that point.
Party.
The corporate
so
party.
You had all these voters who were electrified. They were energized by Bernie Sanders. He wanted tuition-free state colleges. He wanted a single-payer system for health care. He was against jobs going overseas. There was always a sense among these voters that if Hillary Clinton got the nomination, that she would somehow return to the center, and they didn't want that.
And Trump ran
So
against
they stayed at home.
the establishment, Alison.
I can't help reflecting on the fact, since I come from Scotland, of how similar this is to Brexit, and how in Great Britain, the very next day, people started hearing that much of what they'd heard on the campaign was actually lies and was not going to come to pass, and started to regret their vote. You know, I don't know how soon it'll be before people start to wonder. I mean, if you look at repealing the Affordable Care Act, if we have 20 million people suddenly with no health care, you know, how are people going to react? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with legislation.
But some of what he has promised will probably happen, and that's immigration. There will be big changes where immigration is concerned.
But I've heard those anecdotal reports of people saying literally in the same breath, he's going to bring back my jobs, get rid of Obamacare, but I want to keep the health care policy I got under that.
Right.
So I think that that's a major issue, that as policies roll forward, people are going to become disappointed. Now the question is, will he point the blame at the other party, or will it finally come home to roost with
Well, let me throw something out here, and I'd like everybody to weigh in. A lot of postmortems going on here. One says that it was a lot of sexism, partly racism, and we'll hear a clip coming up regarding that assessment, and some willful ignorance, which I think you've just alluded to, Carl.
According to independent fact checkers, academics, as if we trust these people anymore, 90%
Not the media,
of
that's
his
for
major
sure.
statements were found to be factually incorrect. But you were not selling facts, you were selling feelings. And Hillary Clinton's campaign had very little in the way of feelings in it that got people. She got 10
But
million
also,
more
who was
votes
the
less
dispenser? Who was
than
the
Obama.
dispenser of those facts? The media was the dispenser of those facts. And the people who voted for Trump hate the media. They're tired of the so-called experts, the pundits, who are telling them what the world is, what their world is.
But Michael, we've never seen, I think, in our adult lives, and we've covered a lot of campaigns and watched this for a long time, where a candidate says, I never said that, and you've got videotape to say, you just said that.
That's true, and I think a lot of people that voted for him were aware of that they just didn't care. They were so concerned, upset about other things. I mean, you know, the one thing also that of all the qualifications from Hillary Clinton, she still kind of had a wonky approach and didn't have the emotion. She didn't have the real message. I mean, you know, I kind of guffawed early on with the Make America Great Again, which was, you know, taken from the Ronald Reagan days and the comparisons, but, excuse me, but Trump had a simple approach, and that usually works in politics. I mean, he basically said, this is broken and I can fix it, and just in a lot of interviews after the election, a lot of people think that's the case, and it's not just a partisan thing, and that's going to be the really interesting aspect. You know, Republicans are wanting to say, oh, this was a great victory. They don't know what they're in for because nobody quite does.
Well,
it was the establishment that people are upset about, and it's not a partisan thing.
And they wanted to upend everything.
Well, and to go to your point about the simple message, one early on was we got to get rid of the political correct nonsense. And I can't tell you how many times I saw Trump supporters interviewed saying, "I'm tired of this political correctness," which is, you know, a code word for saying it's okay now to come out in public and say, "Here, I'm blaming the other."
And you know, we talked about how the simple message. I mean, his notion of the economy, this and that being rigged, really hit home with a lot of people. They feel that. The real irony is
Bernie hit home
this
with
is
that
the guy
same message,
that's benefited from all this rigged aspect. The economy, you know, maybe even the election. I mean, the way the media covered him in the primary, I mean, the amount of attention he got was, you know, many times fold of anybody else. I mean, his plane would land, and that would make a headline news.
Right.
Something else about the media, because I think the media is getting a great deal of flack for this, and I think that there is some justification for that. But on the other hand, when you look at how the media has changed and how many people are getting their news from Facebook now, and the lack of really a well-informed, heavily researched media where people can really trust what they're reading. I mean, I have heard so many people believe things about Hillary Clinton, for example, that they say is the truth because they heard it.
Oh, I think she was up to 26 murders, I think.
Yes.
I'll
mean,
take the hit on that one as an educator. We have failed to be able to produce a generation or 2 generations of people who can separate abject fact or fiction from fact. I mean, you know, in our schools, we don't teach Google. We don't teach how to do informed internet searches. So people think, if I saw it on the internet, I find what I believe in, I can simply stay in that bubble, and truth no longer matters. It used to be people would lie but try to convince us the truth. Now they don't even have to do
but
that.
What I don't understand is the video shown of Trump saying highly objectionable things and still getting the votes that he got.
And then denying he said it in the video is right there. That to me is remarkable. Well, let's talk about one thing regarding mainstream coverage of this campaign. That is the emails. To my mind, at 40 years in journalism, this was the most overhyped story I think I've ever seen, next to maybe the OJ
I agree
trial.
With you, Mark, and I think that everybody sort of shrugged at what FBI Director Comey did in the last 11 days, and I think that, given the tightness of the race, that was a determinative factor as much as anything in the late going. Now,
it brought it all back
today,
up again.
The Clinton campaign, her data person, basically said that was it. We had the momentum, and that changed everything we lost in the last week. Again, there's a million things, but just sort of riffing off what you're saying about, I thought the emails was overhyped, but that was just who knew October surprise would come from the Obama administration?
It's the equivalent of 2004. He voted for the war, he voted against it. And the problem was Kerry couldn't explain why that was a ridiculous statement, and Hillary Clinton could never quite put the emails to rest, saying it didn't really cause an issue, and it just made her look bad.
That spoke to the larger distrust of Hillary Clinton and her husband. So that was something that she just couldn't shake off. But the polls did show that the race was tightening between the two of them even before Comey made his announcement a week before the election.
Now, Allison, you mentioned something early on. It reminded you of Brexit and what happened over there and the dissolution. There were a number of things, watching the coverage in England there and in the UK, that flat out things that were said to support that campaign were flat out wrong.
Yes,
Are we going to see that in the coming weeks here when, geez, we're not really maybe going to build a wall, maybe we're not going to round up 11 million people, this sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of promises have been made. Even the idea that you can bring back coal mining. I mean, there's a lot of promises that really don't jive with the way the world is going now. And I think maybe this is the problem: is that we've got climate change, we've got globalization, where jobs are just fleeing the country, and actually neither candidate can really solve the reality of what is happening on our planet.
And lock her up might fall into that now, too. They're all kind of backing away. Well, maybe we won't prosecute. I did want to turn to you, though, on that notion while I'm thinking of it, because Donald Trump is facing a lawsuit here. You covered that at a federal court hearing yesterday. The national media is here. A president-elect or a sitting president is being sued in court in San Diego for fraud. I mean, that's extraordinary.
For fraud, yeah. Former students are saying that Trump University was a scam aimed at basically bilking them of over $30,000 and promising in exchange to teach them about Trump's real estate secrets, his successful real estate secrets, and to be taught by instructors who were handpicked by Trump. They're saying that never happened. He's being sued. Their attorneys want him to testify live in court. The judge said yesterday, Judge Gonzalo Curiel, the federal judge, who was
maligned, of course,
infamously accused of bias by Donald Trump during the campaign, said that you two, both sides, you might want to consider sitting down and trying to settle this matter.
But it's due for trial when?
November 28th.
Coming
Jury
right
selection is about to start, so try finding a jury.
It hasn't heard about this particular
Mark,
defendant.
I have always been loath to make predictions in politics before elections and so forth, but I'll make a prediction here on that. I think that they settle it, and he comes out and declares a victory. Now, Trump is famous for saying, I never settle. Well, he does. When he got sued by the federal government over racial discrimination efforts on his real estate, he fought them, claimed he was a victim, ultimately settled. And there was a very interesting profile on both him and Hillary Clinton on Frontline not long ago, just the other night before the election. And this guy that knows him well, is one of his advisors, said, by any yardstick, he lost that case, but he came out and declared a victory, and that sort of watered down the how did he actually do on that? Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like he's the president of the United States now.
Here's the problem that we face coming up. Donald Trump's career has been based on taking the value out of whatever he's working on and then leaving the remains for somebody else to clean up. He could pass the buck. I remember somebody who had this job before saying the buck stops here. I don't know if that approach is going to work once you're president. At some point, some of these negativities are going to come back on him, and he's never been one to deal with those things openly and effectively. You can't blame everybody else on the presidency.
And we're due for a recession, whether Clinton got elected or Trump. We are way long into this expansion.
4 years.
Longest in American history, so the new president is going to own that. I did want to segue, thanks that you mentioned racism again. We have a bite from Van Jones, political activist, commentator for CNN, and of course a strong Democrat here, and emotional about what he sees as the big reason for Trump's win.
This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes. And Donald Trump has a responsibility tonight to come out and reassure people that he is going to be the president of all the people who he insulted and offended and brushed aside. Yeah, when you say you want to take your country back, you got a lot of people who feel that we're not represented well either. But we don't want to feel that someone has been elected by throwing away some of us to appeal more deeply to others. So this is a deeply painful moment tonight. I know it's not just about race. There's more going on than that. But race is here, too. We got to talk.
Well, I think you hear in that bite just the anger, certainly from that point of view, and that's what we've been talking about. I want to bring up a couple of other things before we have to leave this segment and talk about some other election issues. One is, gets back to Brexit, Cal-exit. There's this push now to secede from the Union and maybe take Oregon and Washington along, too. Yeah.
I relate to my family in Scotland that are just horrified and want to secede from Britain, and now I'm in California.
So this is a real thing. I mean, they were protesting in Sacramento, and you're going to hear this. They're going to try and put it on the ballot on 2018 in a special election. I mean, it's okay.
But what is happening today?
But the sentiment is there.
Just today,
they're in Texas, and that didn't happen.
The Speaker of the Assembly and the President Pro Tem of the Senate issued a statement, which basically, when you read between the lines, said, "Look, California's here, the country's here. We're not letting you pull us back. It's the closest I've seen to elected government officials talking about a state nullification since, well, let's see, the 1830s, and that could produce some major issues. What if the president orders a major roundup of illegal immigrants in the state of California, says we're not going to play the game? I can see a lot of issues down the pike on non-willingness of this state to comply with federal mandates.
And briefly, what about the Electoral College? They still have to vote in December, and this thing that's set up by the founders to not have a Democratic mob elect a tyrant, are they going to have this faithless voters who will block Trump in the
problem, Mark, with the Electoral College, it was never designed to allow the public to vote. We grafted that on top of it, and like a Windows operating system, you tend to get that spinning hourglass of death more often than you want. That's when somebody doesn't win the popular vote. But no, the faithless electors, if you don't vote the way your party assigned you to as an elector to vote, somebody's going to show up from the replacement list. You might have one or two aberrations, but there will be no saving us from the electors.
And again, twice in 16 years now, we've had a Democrat elected in the popular vote, but is going to lose, and this time much bigger in the Electoral College than Al Gore did.
We paid our monies, and now we take our chances.
We take our chances. All right, let's turn to California. One of America's bluest states, as we're noting here. Several progressive measures approved here. Michael, start with medical marijuana, not medical marijuana anymore, recreational, all marijuana here. What's that going to mean in San Diego and across the state?
Well, it's going to mean a wait for a while for things to really change. I mean, I guess the law is now that it's legal to have, an ounce of marijuana. It's to grow, up to six plants and to smoke in the places where you can smoke. But the big aspect of this is real the commercialization of it, and that's going to take a long time. It's a huge permitting process, both at the state and local level. And as we've seen from the city of San Diego, it's not easy and it's really expensive. It's going to take some time, and one of the questions is, those that played by the rules, the medical marijuana shops that are legitimate and have permits, are they going to get a leg up? Mm-hmm. But the other aspect is it's going to be such a rigorous regulatory system to win through, and the cost. Are we going to see these bogus shops crop up, which are all over the place even now, and they can't shut them down? So it's going to be very interesting. But it's funny because I think that in the large sense, marijuana has been so accepted. It's a citation at best now.
Right, it's quasi-legal already. Yeah.
Are people that don't smoke pot going to go out and try it now? Maybe, but not.
Studies show that doesn't happen elsewhere. Other progressive measures here. We extended income tax hikes on the wealthy, and that was supposed to be a temporary thing. We're taxing the wealthy in California, and
across
also
the board, it was a progressive victory in the state of California, and pretty much everything anything but the death penalty, and that was closer than it's ever been before.
Past, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed was that, in Golden Hall we were talking all about propositions, but not about politicians. And so it's kind of interesting that now most of the big changes are happening due to a vote of the people rather than us voting for a representative who then votes it in. And some of these, perhaps like extending the tax on the wealthy, might have been hard for a politician to do without losing, affluent backers.
Financial support from the wealthy.
You saw that across the country. Minimum wage laws passed in a number of states. And so where Washington won't take us, a lot of states are doing on their own, including red states.
Well, it's interesting, Carl, because you say that, and look at how far ahead or progressive, if you will, California has been on immigrants and so forth. I mean, they were, Jerry Brown was very proud of getting ahead of the federal government, passing and signing all these laws.
And fighting that ended Pete Wilson and the statewide power of the Republican Party.
So it sort of goes back to, what's Trump going to do and how's the state going to respond, particularly on, unauthorized immigrants.
Amitha, speaking of specific candidates, as Allison was saying, we now have a new senator from California, and again, it's a woman replacing a woman, but there's some twists here with the Attorney General of the state moving to Washington.
Well, I mean, she's a liberal person. She was in favor of immigration reform. She was in favor of legalizing recreational pot. She's going to a whole different Congress now,
And a huge win over a Latina here.
A huge win over a Latina, but it's one thing to think a certain way in California. With the election, she goes to Washington, where you have two chambers of Congress dominated by Republicans. How much can she push the liberal agenda through Congress?
All right, let's shift down a little closer to home here in the county, and I want to start with the big vote in San Diego. Of course, the Chargers' proposal for a stadium/convention center expansion downtown didn't do very well at all. What happens now?
Now you have bipartisanship. Both parties, independents, libertarians, liberals, voted it down by a substantial margin. The parties weren't on board. The taxpayer associations had issue with it. The mayor and the chamber liked it. But I think the one thing everybody could agree with is that the fact that the Chargers haven't taken us to the big dance, so we're not giving them a new dance hall yet.
Well, that's true. And also they spent a year here saying, geez, we're going to Carson. We don't really like you folks very much.
Yeah, they were dating around, and then they went into marriage therapy.
So, but what's your sense? I mean, do they exercise their option now and try to go to L.A. in January? I mean,
that's where the money is.
So, but if they do that, doesn't the NFL want a professional team in San Diego?
All good questions. I think we're left with way more questions than answers here after this particular vote. I mean,
that never happens after election.
But he could sell the team. He could try to work out something on Plan B in Mission Valley with the Faulkner, Ron Roberts plan, et cetera, et cetera. Speaking of the county, Allison, I did want to turn to a couple of issues there that were on the ballot. Voters didn't approve this Sandag plan to raise billions over a long period of time, half-cent sales tax. To turn it down.
Right. Well, the voters have spoken, but what it means is fewer houses and not a lot of money to be spent, or at least a lot of the infrastructure projects may take a lot longer than they would have if we had passed this. So, I mean, we are heading for higher house prices and gridlock. I mean, I think that the Measure B one was quite a surprise to me, to be honest. I thought, being a county-wide vote, people would just go for the sales pitch, which was that it would bring more affordable housing, which, in fact, it would not. But the voters surprised me. They educated themselves and they voted no on that. It still leaves the question of where will we build more. I think developers are looking around saying, well, if we can't get it through, individual city councils and the normal CEQA process, and we can't get it through with an initiative, how can we get approval of our project? So I think this is something that voters really need to be considering, is if we vote no on these things, the problem still remains. We are a growing community and we haven't figured out how to grow.
Yeah, we're going to need a bond issue at some point, city and county-wide, to repair a couple of $1 billion in infrastructure projects. And also, if you're not going to have greater density in the urban core and you're not going to allow sprawl, unless we start floating balloons with houses in them or build them on the float, we're going to have a rising housing crisis, which is why so many families are being forced out of the major San Diego area into the inland empire and up into Victorville.
Because it's cheaper.
It's always hard to redo something, but remember Proposition A, the transportation tax, if you will, the Sandag half-cent sales tax, got 57% of the vote. It needed 2/3 now, but at least that shows that a strong majority are willing to head in that way. But yeah, maybe a bond's the way to do it. Tax increases are tough.
Well, the other thing is, if I think Labor had not been against it, it might have passed. So I mean, if there was more of a guarantee that the jobs would go to local people,
I mean,
that might have changed.
There's sort of two sides to that. Yeah, they could come back and try to do it again. It's sort of unfortunate because people talk about government not working, not coming to a consensus. This was, what, 18 cities, representatives on Sandags that somehow cobbled this together. Maybe it wasn't the best thing for everybody, but it doesn't take much to defeat a 2/3 vote. Certainly one interest group like Labor, but there were environmentalists. It had a tough road to go, but it was pretty impressive still nonetheless.
Yeah, now we touched earlier, it could be a recession coming up. Some people say we're in a housing bubble here. This affordable housing thing is a crisis for everybody in this county.
Oh,
And
certainly.
you know, one of the other results that we might mention is T in Encinitas, where they also refused to vote for a housing element, the only city in the county that doesn't have a housing element. And in spite of the fact that they risk losing thousands in taxpayer money fighting useless lawsuits, they still said, no, we do not want this plan. So there is, I think, you know, a sort of feeling in jurisdictions around the county that it's going to be very hard to be growing the way we need to grow.
Well, lots of questions on lots of things looking forward here, and lots to talk about on this show as we head into the coming year, and it's going to be interesting. That does wrap up another week. We're out of time. On the KPBS Roundtable, I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Carl Luna, Professor of Political Science at Mesa College, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, and Allison St. John, also of KPBS News. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.